Welcome back. This piece explores the journey of dismantling religious certainty to rebuild meaning around reason and responsibility. We see three key opportunities here to really elevate its impact. So let's start with the emotional stakes. The material does a great job of stating the grief and loneliness of this process. It says, to question a doctrine is to threaten a structure of belonging. So our first point is this: deepen the reader's investment by grounding the abstract ideas of loss and freedom in tangible relational consequence.
Right. And it's laid out so clearly. But I do wonder if we fully leverage those emotional stakes the writer has already established.
What do you mean?
Well, the weakness, as I see it, is that the emotional cost, the grief and the painful, slow process, it's powerfully stated right at the beginning, but then it gets overshadowed, and pretty quickly, by this huge intellectual victory of reason that follows.
That seems like a pretty common way to structure things, right? Get the pain out of the way, then move on to the solution.
It is. But the cost here is that the whole conflict feels internal, almost purely philosophical.
So if a reader hasn't had that specific internal struggle, they're just watching someone think.
Exactly. It's an intellectual exercise. The text mentions that doctrines bind family, community, reputation. That's the external pressure, but we don't really see it in action. We hear about the writer's pain, but we don't witness the community's reaction.
So the reader is told that the writer is grieving, but they never see the injury that actually caused the grief.
That's it. The grief feels less like a consequence of rebellion and more like a side effect of, thinking too hard. So my suggestion is to inject some specific external moments where the cost of disobedience is vividly paid.
Make it a visible, relational trauma.
Yes, that's what transforms it from an internal struggle into a high-stakes story of survival.
Okay, that's a powerful idea. But it can be hard to write a little scene like that, a micro scene, without it feeling, cliché or overly dramatic. What kind of trauma are we talking about? A big shouting match?
I think something much quieter would be more effective here, more insidious.
A moment of irreversible silence, maybe.
Exactly that. Instead of just stating that doctrines bind people together, show us a moment where that bond breaks. A scene with, say, a parent or a mentor figure.
And the break isn't about theology?
No, it's about the cold realization of what that relationship was really conditional upon. It wasn't love, it was obedience.
That's strong. The relationship ends not because of anger, but because one person just refused to play by the rules of belonging.
Precisely. Or you could take that moment where the writer realizes belief had been inverted. Instead of just telling us, show us how it plays out socially.
How so?
Show the author refusing to do something, a communal ritual, or refusing to use that highly charged language, sacred, sin, salvation, in a moment where it's absolutely expected.
And that refusal creates a visible crack in the relationship.
An explicit fracture. And that validates the cost the author claims to have paid. Suddenly that intellectual clarity they find later feels truly earned because it came at a real social risk.
It becomes a necessary shelter from an emotional storm, not just an academic trophy.
That's the narrative payoff. The phrase, "the process was painful, slow, and often lonely," is no longer just a statement. It's a documented fact.
I see. That makes a lot of sense. You need that injection of external drama to get the reader's emotional buy-in. Okay, let's pivot to what comes next, the reconstruction. So after you tear everything down, you have to build something new. And I really like the commitment here to creating a self-sustaining ethical system. It introduces this idea of the human measure, where morality is grounded, not imposed. It's all about reducing harm, increasing trust.
It's admirable for sure, but it also creates, I think, our next big opportunity. We need to strengthen the concept of the human measure by moving it from comparative philosophy into active decision-making ethics.
Okay, building on that, I did notice the text spends a lot of time defining the new ethics by what they're not. Not dependent on divine command, not postponed until eternity.
Right, the contrast is very clear, and the critique of the old system is sharp.
But you're saying defining it by contrast is a weakness? Why?
Because the new framework risks sounding, a little too generally positive without ever being really tested. The comparison proves why the old system failed. it doesn't yet prove why the human measure works, especially when things get messy.
So, traditional faith systems, with all their flaws, at least try to answer the really hard, ambiguous moral questions.
They do, and if this new system only looks good in areas where the old one was obviously flawed, like infinite punishment, it hasn't shown its superiority in the gray areas of real life.
We need to see it operate when the answer isn't just reject dogma, but, okay, now choose the least worst outcome.
It needs a stress test, a situation where the author has to wrestle with the system's limits. That's what proves its maturity.
Okay, I see.
So the suggestion is this: introduce a high-stakes ethical dilemma, one that's fundamentally unsolvable by either system, and then show how the human measure approaches the practical work that's required after you accept that you can't fix everything.
But isn't there a risk there? If you immediately show the new system breaking down, couldn't that undermine the reader's confidence in it?
I think that's the crucial difference, isn't it? A faith-based system promises a perfect, ultimate solution, even if it's deferred. A reality-based ethic, the human measure, should be celebrated for its ability to accept reality without collapsing into nihilism. Showing its limits isn't failure, it's maturity, it's robustness.
It proves the system is designed for the world as it is, not as we wish it was.
Exactly. It makes it feel less like a philosophy and more like a tool.
So how do we make this concrete?
Well, we can connect it directly to something the text already says. Some losses are final, some harms remain unrepaired. Let's invent a scenario, a case of public injustice where the person who did the harm is unreachable or completely unrepentant. What does the human measure do then?
That's a great test, especially since the text defines forgiveness as voluntary, relational, conditional on repair.
Yes, show that definition breaking down when the condition repair is impossible. Does the system demand resentment forever, or does it shift the moral energy somewhere else?
Away from the impossible demand for justice and toward mitigating future harms for other people.
Exactly. That proves the system is focused on practical outcomes, not just emotional satisfaction. Or you could test it another way. The author says responsibility stops being theoretical, but our capacity is finite, right? So, show the author having to choose which harm to fix when there are two equally valid problems competing for their limited time and resources.
That forces the human measure to prioritize, to accept limits, without just shrugging and becoming indifferent.
And that single choice, that disciplined ambition, would instantly ground the new framework. It would make the human measure feel incredibly robust and actionable for the reader.
All right, let's move on to our final point, which is about the structure and the rhetorical curve of the piece. After all this, the cost of leaving, the rigor of the new ethics, we have to make sure the conclusion lands with maximum impact. I'm looking at that section, What Remains, specifically the line, I lost certainty to gain clarity, not salvation, but responsibility.
That's the climax. So the topic sentence for this last critique is, increase the dramatic and intellectual impact of the conclusion by strategically reserving high-frequency, summary concepts for maximum rhetorical effect. The central triumph of the whole piece is that shift from dependence to responsibility, and that final line is so powerful. But there's a subtle structural weakness right now.
Which is?
The words responsibility and accountability, they're used pretty frequently throughout the middle sections. In Authority and the Cost of Obedience, in Reason Without Shelter.
Which makes sense. Logically, the author is talking about the gradual reclamation of those qualities.
Logically, yes, but rhetorically, maybe not. Using those words so heavily in the middle is preemptive. It diminishes their impact when they're used as the final, earned conclusion.
It flattens the rhetorical curve.
It does. By the time you get to the end, you feel like the author has been talking about responsibility for chapters, not arriving at it as the final, hard-won prize.
It's like a symphony that plays its main theme quietly a few times before the big finale. You want that final declaration of responsibility to feel like a destination you've reached, not just a state you've been in for half the journey.
You put it perfectly. So the suggestion is really a careful surgical edit. Go through the material leading up to the end and substitute those core words, especially responsibility, with more provisional, process-oriented synonyms.
So you're not changing the idea, just the specific word.
Exactly. It's a discipline, but it ensures that when that final affirmation lands,
The word responsibility carries all the thematic gravity it's made to.
I think this writer would appreciate that kind of precision. Can you give an example?
Sure. In the parts talking about the moral dimension of thinking, where it says, error has real cost, instead of responsibility, use words that describe the process. Use things like consequence, or agency, or even due diligence. They carry the ethical weight without giving away the ending.
And in that section, authority and the cost of obedience?
Instead of saying responsibility returns, maybe frame it as independence must be reclaimed, or personal judgment must be engaged.
That's a powerful distinction. You use these process words, reclaiming, engaging, to build toward the final state. It elevates the word responsibility from just a condition of life to the grand earned summation of the entire effort.
It becomes the thematic answer to the whole question of the journey. We want that sentence, I arrived at responsibility, to feel like a declaration, a resonant arrival, not a restatement of something we already knew.
That brings us to the end. So, to recap, we focused on 3 key opportunities for this really sophisticated piece. First, deepening the emotional stakes by showing the external, relational cost of inquiry.
Second, proving the strength of the new human measure by testing it against nuanced, difficult dilemmas.
It's all about sharpening that dramatic curve.
I can really see what you're going for here, and I think these steps will significantly strengthen the structure and flow of what's already very powerful material. We'd invite you to make these revisions and please submit your work back to us for another critique.